Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. The message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how it was rationally conveyed and called upon humanity to ponder, to reflect, etc., in a very logical, very lucid style and in a systematic way. But the response of man to the revelation or to the message of God, it is, you can say, in two ways. There are two different responses the revelation receives. One, that of rejection. One, that of not accepting this first response. The second one is that of acceptance. So, this surah, from beginning to end, it first of all emphasizes upon the bounties of God, the blessings of God to man in different forms, tangible, intangible, the big and small, to individual and communities, etc. Now, what is important is, as we saw in the previous episode, the main causes of rejection are: number one, arrogance; number two, they believe it to be historical myths, the old stories of previous people, and that's why they reject. And third, what the Quran says is, they not only do not believe, they also prevent others. This is the response of the people who reject. The point is, Quran asks them, do you have any logic, any reason, any evidence to reject it? It is called ilm. Quran says, yazillunahum bighayri ilm. They are themselves, on the wrong path. They reject, but they make others reject it. They persuade others to reject. Yazillunahum, they lead the people go astray along with them. But how? Bighayri ilm, without any evidence. This is the third cause of rejection. And fourthly, the response is irrational. Quran tells them to think, to ponder, to reflect, and their response is not based on reason, but based on passions and emotions of hatred, of prejudice, of animosity. So this is irrational response to the rational message. This is one set of response. The other set is that of those who believe and those who accept. The chapter, tells them, when it was revealed to them, they say it is khaira, means the best part that we have received. The revelation is the best thing to us. They call it khaira. And so their faith and their good conduct, iman and amal salih. This is the second response of man. Among people, there are those who believe and those who reject. The responses, as we saw earlier, those who reject, it is purely irrational. There is no logic, no reason. Those who deny God, the existence of God, they don't have any reason to deny. They don't have any evidence, the proof, conclusive proof. Till today, no scientist, no philosopher, no thinker has succeeded to prove that their God is not there. So Surah Nahl gives the message to invoke your reason, your good counsel, your reason. That's why the word yatafakkarun appears 3 times in this whole chapter. Means you think, or if you can't think, yaqilun. Twice it has appeared, the word yaqilun in 2 verses. Understand. But if you can't do the 3rd level, yasma'un, use your senses, seeing, hearing. These are 2 main organs, sense organs that help you to reach out to God. Then there is another important thing in this, very interesting fact rather. This chapter number 16, Surah Nahl, has 16 verses in which you will find triplets. Means each verse has 3 things, 3 different things. Means a set of 3 things in each verse. How many? 16 verses are there. This is quite interesting. Rather, we can say a miracle. Chapter number 16 has 16 verses. And in each verse, what do you find? A set of 3 things. So what they are? You can find them, say, for example, number 1, in verse number 5. There are 3 things mentioned. Dif'un, munafi'un, takulun. Dif'un, warmth, clothing. Benefits, number 2, munafa. Number 3, takul means food that man eats. Then in verse number 8, khayl, bigal, hamir. Khayl means horse. Number 2, bigal means mules. Hamir means donkey. Then in verse number 11, fruits. 3 fruits enumerated. Olive, zaitun, nakhil, that is date palms. Anab means grapevines. Then verse number 14, again 3 bounties from ocean. Lahma, seafood. Hilyatan, ornaments. Full ships. Then in verse number 49, prostration before God. Who prostrate before God? Mafi samawat, everything in the heaven. In the heavens rather, not heaven, heavens, many. Samawat. Number 2, mafil ars, whatever on earth, everything on earth. Mafil ars. Number 3, malaika. So God has mentioned separately in 49 angels. This thing means everybody prostrates in this universe. All the creatures, among all the creatures, animate, inanimate, etc. Animate, inanimate, living, non-living, or even angels. Everybody prostrates. How? It has been mentioned, whether the mountains, the flowing rivers, or the winds, or the flowers, or animals, or the vegetation, or the sun, moon, everything obeys God, submits the will of God. How? By doing their duty. This is their prostration. They do not defy God. Whatever job assigned to them, they fulfill it diligently, dutifully, without negligence, without defiance. This is their prostration. Then in verse number 64, purpose of Quran has been mentioned. Now there are 3 purposes mentioned. Number 1, لِتُبَيِّنَ لَهُمُ الَّذِي اخْتَلَفُوا فِيهِ, means to explain to them, to whom? To mankind, about what they disagreed and why they disagreed. So Quran has been revealed. The purpose of Quran is to explain to mankind what about the differences, about the disagreements, about the reason they disagree, or the points of disagreement which they raise about God, etc. Quran explains. Even about their own message, where they have gone astray, where they have adopted the wrong path, which they have forgotten, etc. Or they oppose, they reject. So what are the causes of disagreement? Quran explains. This is the purpose of Quran, number 1. And number 2, Huda. Quran is a book of guidance. It guides mankind about God, about themselves, about everything, how to live in this world. It guides in every aspect of human life to lead on a straight path, a principled life, a truthful life, a life of righteousness, life of piety. Quran is a guidance. Quran is not a guidance in subjects like mathematics, physics, geometry, etc., or natural sciences. It is not a book of science or psychology or mathematics. No. Guidance is for spiritual purpose. Then, third one, Rahmah. What is the purpose of Quran? Rahmah is a mercy to mankind. Despite their opposition, despite their rejection, despite their sins, God is merciful and Quran is a mercy to them. How it helps them? Through, conveying the message of God, to enlightening them, to illuminate their hearts, and also to show them the important principles of life at every step. So it's a mercy. These are three purposes of the Quran. And then another important thing, in verse number 68, there are three things mentioned about the honeybee. Verse number 68, number one, God inspires honeybee to build its hive, its honeycomb, its colony. Where number one, at Jibal, mountain. Number two, Shajar, on trees. Number three, Yarishun, in structures or habitations, etc. So these are three things mentioned about the honeybee hives, about the building of honeybees hives in verse number 68. Then family. About family, God mentioned three things. Your wife, azwaja, your mate, your spouses, etc. Number two, banin, your children. Number three, hafada, your grandchildren. So three things mentioned here about family, verse number 72. Then number 9, verse number 78, parts of body. The important parts mentioned. One, sama, means ears. Number two, absar, eyes. Number three, heart, afida. So these three parts of body mentioned in verse number 78. Then number 10, verse number 80, household goods and articles for use from cattle. Number one, aswaf, wool. Number two, awbar, fur. Number three, ash'ar, means hair of goat. All the three utilized for, household goods and different articles for use, from cattle only. Verse number 80. Then verse number 81. What we find here? For protection, three things. One, zilal, shadow. Number two, aknana, means shelter. Number three, srabil, means garments to protect from heat, etc. Then number 12, in verse number 89, attributes of Quran have been mentioned. Verse number 89. One, guidance. Now this is repetition, because the importance of Quran is there. In fact, there are 8 verses which about the Quran, the purposes of the Quran, and also about, how to recite the Quran. So 8 verses are there. What we find about the attributes of Quran here, once we mentioned here earlier, and again in verse number 89. What is that? Guidance, huda. Number 2, mercy, rahmah. Number 3, bushra, glad tidings. Then, verse number 90. Here we have Allah's commands. 2 types of commands, do's and don'ts. 3 do's and 3 don'ts. The verse number 90. Number 1, adl. God commands, Allah commands to do justice with everybody, yourself, your family, your society, with God, with everything, the creatures. So, do adl, because your life based upon adl. Number 2, ihsan, excellence, perfection. Your worshipping, your faith, your dealings with people. How? It should be based on excellence, perfect. Means, don't look for, adl is the minimum requirement. Ihsan, the favor that you do, without looking for, the equal response from other. Whether the other party does, in the same way with you, deals with in the same way, or they, betray you, they, irrespective of the response, whether favorable or unfavorable, whether friend or foe, you do ihsan, may do favor to them. Excellence in your behavior, in your prayers also, do prayer, how? As if you are seeing God or God sees you. You live in this world, how? According to in a perfect manner, in all manners. Whatever you do, whatever you don't do it to the excellence. Abiding by all the principles. Then third one, in verse number 90, what God says, God commands to be generous towards your relatives. Give to your relatives. It is called Itai Dil Qurba. So, Adl, Ehsan, Itai Dil Qurba. Itai Dil Qurba, give to your relatives. Be generous towards your relatives. Help them in their need, or even if they don't need. You be helpful to your relatives. Then, Allah tells, verse number 90, don't do certain things. Now, do's and don'ts. What you don't do, God forbids fasha, means shameful deeds, lewdness, vulgarity, immodesty, all these sexual aberrations. So don't go close to them. So that is don't, means Allah forbids fasha. Every act of lewdness is forbidden. So number 2, munkar, means all evils. Everybody believes or considers to be bad, evil. So bad conduct, Allah forbids it. Don't do it. And number 3, baghi, rebellion. Don't transgress, don't rebel. Be within your bounds of, as a servant of God. So don't transgress, don't defy, don't rebel. So these are the 3 don'ts in verse number 90. Then verse number 102, this 14 number, 14 triplet, purpose of Quran. Again, as I mentioned earlier here, لِيُثَبِّتَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, strengthen those who believe, and Huda, those who, guidance, Bushra, glad tidings, this has been repeated actually. Then 108, sealing of the heedless. Sealing of the heedless. Those, now here 3 things are there. Sealing, God puts seal upon their hearts, upon their eyes, upon their ears, for those who reject. Those who are heedless, those who are reckless, those who reject the message of God. Those who are careless about God and His message, to them, God seals what? Number 1, in verse number 108, qulubihim, their hearts. Number 2, sam'ihim, their ears. Number 3, absarihim, their eyes. And this was number 15. And number 16, it was 15 will be repeated. I will go to the one more which is there. Now 16, verse number 125, principles of preaching. How you should preach the message of God that you have to convey to the servants of God. How? In 3 ways. 1, with hikmat, means wisdom. Be wise in dealing with people, because you are doing khair to them. You become their friend. You be helpful to them. Use your wisdom in conveying the message of God. Don't become irrational. Number 2, Mau'izat al-Hasana. Whenever you convey the message of God, you preach, the second principle is, it should be based on fair exhortation. It should be appealing to the people. Then number 3, Jadilhum hiya ahsan. Means, in case of any debate or dialogue, or say argument at the most, how it should be? It should be gracious. You should not be with the spirit of, or with the intention of conquering them, or to dominate over them, or to defeat them. This mentality, this mindset of defeating others, kills the purpose of preaching. So how it should be? Hiya ahsan, in the best way, in a very graceful manner. So these are the 3 things. Now one which was repeated, I will go to that. That is in verse number 69. We see 3 things have been mentioned to the honeybee, which I mentioned about the structure, the hive we mentioned. But the other 3 instructions which are there, fasluki subula rabbika, means follow the path of God. This is addressed to the honeybee, the feminine gender, which they are called worker bees. Then number 2, kuli minas samarat, eat from the fruits or pollinate. And number 3, ittakhidhi buyat, to build a hive. This was there, which was explained in 3 different terms. In verse number 68, verse number 69, it completes the inspiration of God. Fauha rabbika. So, means God reveals, inspires. To whom? To honeybee. So, these are the 16 triplets, 3 things in one verse. So, there are 16 verses that we find. This is a kind of miracle, you can say, of this chapter 16. Now, what is the purpose of the Quran? Let us see. We saw in the triplets the purpose of the Quran. In all, there are 7 verses revealed in this chapter about the Quran, where the word Quran has been used. The main purpose is in verse number 44. God mentions the purpose of the Quran. What is that? Bil bayyinati wa zubur wa anzalna ilayka zikr. We send them with clear proofs and scriptures. What we send? We send a reminder to you to make clear to mankind. So the purpose is, number 1, it is very clear, explicit, no ambiguity. So each and every word, the message is clear, the contents are clear, the message is clear. And number 2, the Zubur proofs are there in that. And it is a reminder to mankind. So remember what has been revealed to you through this message of God, through the revelation, and also conveyed to others. And then, لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ نَزَّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. What do you do? Reflect upon these revelations. The Quran which is revealed, the purpose is to reflect. Just don't decide without following, without understanding. You reflect upon it, ponder over it, think over it. So the purpose of Quran is to reflect, to ponder over it, to go to the purport of, to reach out to the purpose or the gist of the Quran. Otherwise you cannot understand it. Then, verse number 64, it mentions, as mentioned earlier, it is the differences that exist in this world between communities, between different religions, etc. Quran has been sent in order to explain to the people, to make clear why the differences are there. Thus the Quran is a unifying book. It unifies humanity, the book of unity of mankind. What is that? You come to one God. Different gods divide. Polytheism divides. One God unites. So the purpose of Quran is to unite mankind. That's there. And third one, verse number 89, same thing repeated again. Everything has been mentioned very clearly, categorically, explicitly, no ambiguity in this whole Quran. I will not recite it, the whole verse. It's clear. Same thing has come again in verse number 89. But only thing is that it mentions that everything has been mentioned, clearly, that clarity is there. And then it gives bushra, to means give the glad tidings, good news to those who believe, those who surrender to the will of God, those who are Muslims. Then another important thing, all the bounties or the blessing, the favors of God, in this whole chapter, as I mentioned earlier, there are 50 enlisted by God in 25 verses. What we find is 4 different words are used. The word anzala yunazzilu. This word anzala yunazzilu used for revelation, the wahi, the Quran, and also for anzala minas samai man, for water. We send water from the skies. So thus anzala used for revelation and for water. And this has been used, anzala yunazzilu, 11 times. And then another word used for the bounties which have been given, khalaqa yakhluqu. There are 10 times the word khalaqa yakhluqu has been used. This khalaqa samawati wal arz. Samawat, arz means the heavens, the earth. Or khalaqal insan, we created man. Or khalaqal anam, cattle. Then fourth verse is, and a third one is Ja'ala. Ja'ala means we make. Now Ja'ala used for Zawj or Baneen or Hafada. Means your spouses, your children, your grandchildren, etc. So the word, there is a difference between Khalaqa, Ja'ala. Khalaqa, which is created by man. Ja'ala, something which is already created. From that, something has to be made. It is called Ja'ala. The word Ja'ala used 11 times. Then the word Sakhara, Sakhara Shamsa wal Qamar, or Sakhara Layla wal Nahar. So this Sakhara, it appears 4 times in different verses. 4 verses are there. So in all these we find different styles of, revelation of the bounties of God to man, those which are tangible and those which are intangible. Now, the purpose of all these, as I mentioned earlier, nothing but tatafakkarun, to stimulate your reason in the creation. Now, let us see why all these blessings have been given to man. There are, in the Quran, 9 verses which deal with the blessings. 9 verses deal with the blessings. We mention the purpose of the blessings and everything about the blessings. How many blessings are there? Already 50 has been enumerated in the Quran in chapter 16 An-Nahl. But after mentioning all them, all these, Quran says in Surah An-Nahl, verse number 18, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you try to count the bounties of God, the favors of God, the blessings of God, you cannot enumerate them. They are boundless, they are countless, innumerous. Then, now whatever you possess, verse number 53, it says, وَمَا بِكُم مِّن نِعْمَةِ اللَّهِ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ. Means, whatever blessings you enjoy, whatever you have, your health, your wealth, your possessions, your power, your everything, your body or everything around you, whatever you possess, God says, Oma become min ni'amatillah. All these blessings of God that you enjoy, whether you accept or you don't, whether you are believer or not believer, you remember these are from God only. These are the blessings faminallah, from God. This is a gift of God to you. Then another one, in verse number 71, what it says, Afa bi ni'matillah yajhadun. Then after enjoying all the blessings of God, the favors of God, the gifts of God, will you then deny the favors of God? Don't you understand how this blowing water, or blowing winds or flowing water, or the blossoming flowers, etc., around you that you see, such fascinating nature, how it is helping you in food in every way? Have you ever thought about it? And you deny them? So this is a very logical question asked to think about God. Yajhadun, you reject the favors, you deny the favors of God. In next verse it is mentioned, in verse number 112. In this verse, a story of a town has been mentioned. Thus, God narrates a story of a town which enjoyed all the bounties, all the blessings of God, yet it rejected God. Then what? It was ungrateful to the blessings of God. Then what God did? For their ingratitude, God sent drought, and they were afflicted by drought in such a way that they had nothing to eat or no water to drink. They were starving. This was the result of their ingratitude. So thus, this is a warning to mankind, given in verse number 112. God says in verse number 114, فَكُلُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ حَلَالًا طَيِّبًا وَاشْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ إِيَّاهُ تَعْبُدُونَ. So eat what is lawful, what is good, which God has provided to you, and be grateful, be thankful to God, and His blessings if you worship Him alone. And for this, in the last verse, where you can say one more verse, the last one about the blessings of God, verse number 129. In this chapter, Prophet Abraham is the only prophet whose name appears twice in verse number 122, and again in another verse, verse number 121. Two verses are there in which the name of the Prophet Abraham appears as a role model to mankind, and it is mentioned that Abraham was, what is said, Shakira li anumihi, whatever blessings were gifted to him by God, Abraham, peace be upon him, was grateful to God. So what God did, Ishtabahu, God selected him, Wahudahu ila sirati mustaqim, and guided him to the straight path. May Allah show us the straight path, help us in all our endeavors to follow His path and to adopt the principles of righteousness and piety. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alamin.